What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Joining me today, Chris Fedor. Welcome back to the States, my friend. How are you doing? How are you enjoying yourself to be back in Cleveland ahead of Game 2 of the 82-game season against the Detroit Pistons?
Feels really good to be home, man. Feels great to be back in the United States. Getting through customs was actually a breeze. I was stunned. By the time I got to the airport for my flight, there was not a single person in line for customs to go back to the United States. And that's never happened to me before at that airport. So I kind of got there a little bit earlier than I usually would because I didn't want to get stuck in Canada. I really wanted to get home. And obviously the home opener is tomorrow, and I've got to be there for that. The return of JB Bickerstaff in the regular season, the home opener, Kenny Atkinson's first regular season game as head coach of the Cavs at home, all those different things attached to it. So it's great to be home. It's great to be back in the United States. But I got to be honest, Ethan, I am already on fumes. I am on an average of 4 hours of sleep the last 4 nights or something like that. There's a lot that goes into getting ready for the regular season opener. And there were so many things that I had to crank out before the game against Toronto. And at this point, I'm still playing catch up on my life and on my sleep. But we're going to plug along, and we're going to get through it the best that we can. The other thing is, come on, NBA. I think somebody at the league office just hates the Cavs. Or maybe they hate me because 3 of 4, 3 games in 4 nights to start the regular season with 3 of those on the road, including a back-to-back. Are we serious with this schedule? I mean, my goodness. They're going to burn me out in the first week of the regular season.
I had dinner with Detroit Pistons writer Omari, and who's been on this podcast, a good friend of mine, and a good friend of the podcast, and he was like, "Dog, they're running us ragged, trying to get us out of here." Like, the Detroit Pistons schedule might be the only schedule around the NBA that is worse than the Cavs to start the season. Like, just going he's like, "I'm going home for a day, and then I got to get back on the road," all this other stuff. I'm like, it's insane. But I wanted to talk about...
But that's logical. If you think about it, that's logical. That's what the Pistons deserve for being the worst team in the NBA. I'm not trying to be harsh or anything along those lines, but somebody's got to pull the short straw, right? So make it be Detroit. Make it be Charlotte. San Antonio, even. The Cavs, the team that advanced to the Eastern Conference semifinals last year, they got to deal with this to open the season. And I know it's hard. It's really, really hard to put a schedule together, and there's so many things that go into it. But the Pistons having a crappy schedule to start the season is totally justifiable.
I just feel bad for my man Omari, but he said he's gonna get to it. He's gonna be fine. But I mean, Chris, we talk about the Cavs looking a little out of steam going into the fourth quarter, and it was a great thing that they were up by so much to be able to rest some of their star players and get the added rest that they might have needed. Obviously, in a regular game where it was more competitive, you might have seen more players get more minutes. But talking about how the Cavs were able to rest those guys, getting ready for their home opener against the Detroit Pistons in Cleveland, it just feels like they're heading in with a head full of steam and just ready to get going, right? And to me, I want to look at what this Cavs team is going up against, 1, and 2, again, like we mentioned with Scotty Barnes, this is another matchup for Evan Mobley, this time against somebody who was drafted ahead of him in the same class, and how that matchup with Cade Cunningham is going to go, and how much Evan Mobley just ruined the life and the season opening night for Scotty Barnes, and if that's going to be similar. So, Chris, I wanted to get your expectations for this game, obviously with J.B. Bickerstaff coming back to Cleveland for the first time. What do you think it's going to be like atmosphere-wise, but then also trying to put together schemes to go against the Detroit Pistons?
Yeah, I don't know about the atmosphere. That's something that I've been kicking around in my own head. And I've been, as I was flying back from Canada today, I was thinking to myself, okay, what angle do you want to take going into the home opener? What angle are you thinking about attacking when it comes to the game and everything surrounding that? Because I think there are multiple storylines, and you hit on them. But I am really, really interested to see, Ethan, what the reception is going to be for JB Bickerstaff. I am. And I don't know what it's going to be. Because if you go back to last year, look, there were times that JB was the he was the head coach of the Cavs, and it was a team that was on its way to the playoffs, and he was getting booed in his own arena with his family. His family goes to every single home game, and they're going to continue that as now he is the head coach of the Detroit Pistons. And part of JB's ritual was every time he walked off the floor, either at halftime or end of the game, he gave a hug to his daughters because his family was always there in the building. They were always there to support. They were always there to root on the Cavs. They wanted to be a part of that environment. They wanted to be a part of the community, and they were. But like, I remember having conversations with JB where, kids at school were talking to his kids about the possibility of their dad being fired. Or he was sitting there getting ready to coach a game at home, whether it was a regular season game or a playoff game, and he was getting booed during pregame introductions. So, like, has enough time passed? Like, do Cavs fans appreciate the things that JB did while he was here enough because he's no longer the head coach, and the things that bothered him or bothered them about him as a head coach, they no longer have to deal with, and they can move on to Kenny Atkinson, and they feel like they have a better coaching option with Kenny Atkinson? Like, usually it's easier to move on emotionally when you have something to move on to, right? Something that you believe in, something that gives you new hope. So I just wonder if, all the things that fans disliked about JB are in the past. They're in the rear view. They're focused on this team, this coach, this season, and taking a step back emotionally, understanding that JB is no longer the head coach of this team. When you do take that step back, do you show appreciation for him? Because if we're being honest, Ethan, I believe that he deserves a positive reception tomorrow. For all of the things that he did for this franchise, for his ability to get them out of the rebuild darkness. Like, he pulled them from the rebuild rubble and he turned them back into a respectable organization. And look, it wasn't all him. The front office did a really, really good job of assembling talent. They had Evan Mobley. They traded for Jared Allen, Darius Garland. They obviously traded for Donovan Mitchell, which accelerated the rebuild and played a big part in the success that the Cavs had over the last couple of years. Their ability to turn the corner and emerge from the rebuild darkness. But like, JB was a huge part of it. And I just don't think we can sit here as fans, as media members, as whoever we are that's talking about this, and sit there and say that it was a guarantee that the Cavs were going to emerge from that, or it was a guarantee that any other coach would have been able to do the same things that JB did. No, He was, during the time that he was here, he was the right guy at the right time. He was very, very successful. He did something that no other coach in the post LeBron era was able to do. That can't be overlooked. Get them to the playoffs, get them to win a playoff series without LeBron James. So if we're being honest, the reception for somebody with that kind of resume, despite the fact that he didn't do everything right, despite the fact that he is a flawed coach, despite the fact that he did have shortcomings that often showed up in the playoffs and that frustrated fans at the time. And despite the fact that players felt like they needed a new voice, they needed a new direction, they needed a new system, despite all of that, the job that he did while he was here should be praised and should be appreciated. We'll see.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. Obviously, I was only here for a year of his tenure, but while he was here, being able to watch not only the stress that was put on him to have success, but also just from the front office trying to learn and figure out where they wanted to go with this head coach, it felt like J.U. Bickerstaff, every time there was a big loss, every time that there was a stressful situation, would come to the press conference and you could feel the atmosphere changing in the media room, and it was different. But I also think when you talk about the praise that he deserves from the time that he's had as a Cavs coach, right? It's not only the success that he had in the box score and the success that he has in the win and loss column, but it's also what he was able to implement in an era that was changing to something completely different, right? We remember the Lowry Markkanen at small forward, the Dean Wade as the backup for Lowry Markkanen, and still having these guys that were 7-footers and Jared Allen and Evan Mobley as the front court, right? That was something that was almost unheard of in an era that was changing to a more spread out lineup. And to give JB Bickerstaff credit, the Cavs are kind of going back to that slightly with the new starting lineup that they have without Max Strus, right? 6'10", 2 7-footers. Dean Wade, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, right? That's something that you also got to take respect for. And Chris, I want to just run through the seasons that JB Bickerstaff had while he was in Cleveland, right?
Mm-hmm.
22 losses in his first full season. Obviously, he took over in 2019-2020, but in the 2020-2021 season, he got 22 wins. Then he got 44 wins and got them to a play-in seed. Then he got 51 wins, and they went to the first round of the playoffs, losing to the New York Knicks. And then they got 48 wins and went to the second round and lost to the Boston Celtics, the eventual NBA champions. So it wasn't like this was somebody that couldn't get this team to buy in to what he's doing. And I feel like that is something that we have both agreed on is why he's going to fit in with the Detroit Pistons, a team that is in a rebuild, a team that is looking for new culture, a team that is looking for somebody to give voice and all the things that the Cavs needed at the start of their rebuild before Donovan Mitchell got here and, as you said, accelerated everything that was going on with this organization. And that's why I think Detroit is going to be happy with J.B. Bickerstaff and everything that he can bring. Not going to say accomplish just yet, because that also depends on the roster and things of that nature. But I feel like J.B. Bickerstaff is a good fit in Detroit, and I feel like he should get a good reception when he comes back to Cleveland. His success with the Cavs, bringing them to the playoffs for the first time without LeBron in over 30 years, all the statistics that we can talk about, but the person that he was while doing it and handling all the noise outside of those things, I never knew him to be someone to like just change his tone or whatever. He was the same person, win or loss, and that to go through all of those different things.
And you know what, Ethan? I think, I know part of the reason why I've been so supportive of JB and tried to present like everything that he meant to this organization and everything that he did for this organization is because I was in it. I was in it during the dark time. And I know the feeling around the organization. I know what the players were saying about the John Beeline era, right? Like I lived that. I lived that in a way that the casual fan didn't, right? I was behind the scenes seeing that all unfold, watching that in the locker room, seeing the interactions between John Beeline, seeing how out of place and out of touch he was, and talking to the players on the record and off the record, and feeling the daily vibe and a lack of hope that existed with the organization. So I think part of the reason why, you know, there should be more appreciation for JB is just because of how bad it was when he took over, and the fact that it was at that point like almost rock bottom. Um, the fact that it was all the way there, and then almost in a blink, he got this team to buy into defense. He gave this team identity. He established the kind of culture that is sustainable, the kind of culture that still, to some degree, exists today. And look, Kenny Atkinson is putting his imprint on this organization, and he has different philosophies and different principles and stuff like that. But a lot of what the Cavs are right now today, the hope that fills this franchise, the belief that they can be a championship contender, that all started with JB. And I just, fans were aware, I think, of how bad things were with John Beilein, but I don't know that they felt it to the same level. So, so many people have criticized me, and they've called me like a JB supporter, or I was too easy on JB while he was here, or I gave him too much credit. Like, that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But my opinion was shaped based on like what I lived for those early days of this rebuild. And quite frankly, it was a disaster. And there were so many missteps along the way by this organization. The front office didn't do everything right. The coaching staff didn't do everything right. The players didn't do everything right. And like at various points early on in the rebuild, it felt like there was no path out of it. It felt like the Cavs were on a treadmill, and they were running a treadmill to nowhere. And that all changed. The feeling around this organization, the hope, the belief, just like a renewed spirit and different vibes, that all changed when JB took over. And you just can't ignore that.
And sure, he might have lost the locker room allegedly in his last season, but for the 4 years that he had it, for the 5 years that he had it, he left his imprint, as we have been discussing, right? And it was a lasting one that we're still seeing today. And evidently, like, Kobe Altman doesn't make the decision to bring in Donovan Mitchell unless he believes that J.B. Bickerstaff can coach him, right? There wasn't in place a decision already being made that 2 years down the line, we're going to get rid of him because he doesn't fit. No, it was, how does this guy fit in with not only the culture that we've already built, but also the coach that we have in place?
And Kobe doesn't make that move for Donovan Mitchell if he doesn't feel like, the talent was in place for that guy to come in and help them get to the next level. You know what I mean? And part of the reason why that talent was in place is because the front office assembled that talent. But the other part of it is because JB and his coaching staff helped those young guys get better.
And now I want to get a little bit away from the JB aspect of it, because we talked about it. There's multiple storylines in this game, but also talking about just matching up with the Detroit Pistons, right? The Cavs had a great start to the season, one that had few mistakes, if any, and they want to take another step in the right direction with a home opening win against the Detroit Pistons on Friday. For me, it's another opportunity to show that they can continue to put pressure on teams that they should win against. This shouldn't be a contest. This should be against a team that is worse than them. This is against a team that is not as experienced as them when it comes to this. But as you mentioned earlier, right, Chris, being early into the season and not being in mid-season form, getting back into the rhythm, getting cardio, getting more reps in actual games. That could be a situation for the Cavs, especially as they adjust to their home crowd, right? This is something that they've been waiting for the last couple of months to just get back. Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell have all talked about it, about how excited they are to get back to the Rocket and show off how much they've improved for their fan base. Chris, what do you think about the matchup between these two teams? And also, how do you think the Cavs should fare, and if they need to keep their foot on their necks as we go into this next game?
Yeah, that's the thing, Ethan. I mean, I think in an 82 game schedule, there are so many circumstances that are tied into whether a team wins a random game on a Friday night or loses a random game on a Friday night. And the team that they're playing against, those are NBA players too. They get paid too. And we're talking about human beings. And they're entitled to bad days and they can have off nights. And all of those factors you have to take into account. But the truth is, like, if we're looking at the schedule, the games against the upper echelon teams in the Eastern Conference, Boston, New York, Orlando, Milwaukee, and then if you flip it over to the Western Conference, those top tier teams as well, those are essentially like coin flips. You know, you can't expect, unless you're Boston, you can't expect one team, whether it's the Cavs, whether it's the Bucks, 76ers, Denver Nuggets, to consistently win those kinds of games, those marquee matchups. Chances are, unless you're Boston, you're probably going to go like right around 500 in those particular matchups, give or take. Maybe a few more wins, maybe a few more losses. But when you're a team like the Cavs and you have legitimate championship aspirations, the games that you have to bank, the wins that you have to be able to count on, the teams that you should be able to take advantage of and overwhelm in terms of your talent, in terms of your play style, similar to what the Cavs did in the season opener against Toronto. They should be able to do many of those same things against Detroit because Detroit just isn't on the Cavs level from a talent perspective, from an X's and O's perspective, from a philosophical perspective, and from just an organizational development perspective. Detroit is a team that is coming off back-to-back terrible seasons. They're in the early stages of a rebuild, right? Those are the games that you capitalize on. Washington coming up, you know, New Orleans in the state that New Orleans is currently in with all the injuries that they're dealing with and the illness to Zion Williamson. Like, if you are the Cavs and you sit there and you believe that you're one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference and one of the best teams in the NBA, and then when you get these opportunities against these lesser opponents, those are the ones that you have to make count. It's not about going 500 against those teams, give or take. It's about probably winning 60 to 65% of those matchups. And again, like, built into that is the human element and off nights that are going to happen. Like, we can't expect the Cavs to run the table against every team that they're better than. Because if that was the case, all those shiny buildings would not exist in Las Vegas, right? Because everybody would just bet on the favorite and they would win over and over and over again. And that's not how it works. That's not how sports works. But 60 to 65% of those games, I think that's a fair ask of a team like the Cavs. And, you know, despite the fact that there are going to be big time emotions on the Detroit side, and it's basically their NBA finals, and they're going to be really, really motivated to get this one for their coach. This is a pretty favorable home opener for the Cavs. And, you know, for all of the things that are working against them early on this season with the schedule that we've already talked about, playing against Toronto, Detroit, and Washington to open the Kenny Atkinson era is basically like a 3-on-1 fast break.
And as I was taught, kind of similar to what you talked about, you got to win the ones that you're supposed to win.
Yeah.
Everything else is cake. Like, you have to put your all forward in every contest. And that can't be taking for granted, like the good start that you could go on, right? You can't let a team that is lesser than what you believe them to be to have a better opportunity because you don't prepare the same or you don't come in with the same energy, right? And I feel like this Cavs team, as we talked about with the third quarters last year, is already showing the potential to be different from that, to come in with the same preparation that they would for a team like Boston, for a team that they think they have to go balls to the wall to beat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at the statistics against a team like Toronto that was without Emmanuel Quickly, that was without RJ Barrett and Bruce Brown and others, right? Like they showed that. That was kind of something that we learned from them, right? They had the
Mm-hmm.
second highest net rating out of the stats that I'm looking at right now, which is everybody has one game, and then the Boston Celtics have two on NBA.com's advanced stats. And they have the best offensive rating, the Cavs do, 134.7 after their first game. It's just something that you look for this team to make changes from last year, obviously in the offense, obviously with things that they want to implement. But it can also be a mindset and a leadership thing. Like we are not going to get comfortable with where we
Right.
are. We are not going to get comfortable against the team that we think we should be.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to end this podcast, Chris, by talking about the Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley dynamic. And for me, Evan Mobley being getting to play against two players that he is compared to or debated against a lot when it comes to his draft class to start the season is motivation enough to showcase his abilities, if not on his own mindset to say that there's been a lot of talk that I'm going to have a breakout year. I want to show it. But we talked about, and you mentioned in the last podcast about how against Scotty Barnes, there's a little bit more fire from Evan Mobley. Do you think
Mm-hmm.
you predict a little bit more fire against Cade Cunningham, who was taken a couple of picks ahead of Evan Mobley?
No, because Evan didn't want to go to Detroit. So I don't think he holds it against the Pistons for not drafting him. I think it's quite the opposite. I think he's very, very thankful that he did not go to the Pistons. So it's a little bit different when it comes to Scotty. Scotty took something from Evan. He took his Rookie of the Year award. It's an award that Evan believes he should have gotten. It's an award that people around Evan believe that he should have gotten. The only thing that Cade to this point has taken from Evan is like, what was that, the Rising Stars MVP? And I had a bunch of people that reached out to me about my vote because my vote went to Cade too. And, you know, the people that reached out to me weren't very happy about my vote. But nonetheless, I don't think that's something that's keeping Evan up at night. I don't think it's something that he remembers all that vividly. It was the Rising Stars game on All Star Weekend, and I don't think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, people remember who the MVP is of that particular showcase, right? But I think 5, 10 years from now, when you think back to a rookie class of 2021 and who was the Rookie of the Year, that's something that is meaningful. That's something that stands out to you. That's something that you don't forget. So I just think it's a different kind of dynamic between Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley. Like Barnes got the All-Star appearance before Evan, right? Barnes got the Rookie of the Year over Evan. Cade Cunningham, he was the first pick in the draft, and I think a lot of people figured from the time that he stepped on the floor at Oklahoma State that he was probably going to be the first overall pick. And like I said, Evan didn't want to go to Detroit anyway, so I don't think he holds it against the Pistons that they didn't take him. In saying that, because I think the dynamic is different. Evan's a competitor, and he's going to try and be the best version of himself that can help this team win every single night. So might there be a little bit more motivation because he's playing against a draft classmate or he's sharing the floor with a draft classmate? Probably, but certainly not anywhere close to the level that it is when it's Scotty Barnes.
Yeah, I agree, and you make a good point. Having something taken from you definitely
Yep.
fuels a different fire than probably going somewhere that you would have been in purgatory with for a different amount of period, right?
Also, Ethan, I think this is going to be a big Cade Cunningham year.
Oh,
Big
okay.
Cade Cunningham year. Yes.
I'm
Um,
interested.
Remember when Darius talked a few years ago about his appreciation for JB, and part of why he was so appreciative is because JB gave him the keys to the franchise. Basically, JB gave him the keys to the offense. He empowered him. He built confidence within him. I think JB is going to do the same thing for Cade. And it goes without saying, like, Cade is the franchise face of the Detroit Pistons. But, like, JB has a way of instilling confidence in certain guys and making them believe to a level that maybe they hadn't previously. And I do think it's going to be a big Cade season. And I would not be surprised if he puts up the kind of stats that will put him in the all-star conversation. I'm not saying that he's going to get there. I don't know if he's going to get there. A lot of different things have to play out. But I think he's going to be in that conversation. And I think Detroit is going to win, more than in the teens games. And I think that's going to help the profile and the view of Cade Cunningham from people around the league that are voting on those things.
On the other hand, unfortunately for Cade Cunningham, he might be playing against his kryptonite tomorrow night, Friday night, when it comes to Dean Wade potentially being in the starting lineup again.
Let's hold off on that just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. All I know is Dean Wade is a better defensive matchup for Cade Cunningham
Yes.
than anybody else that the Cavs may have
Yes.
in their lineup.
The
So
size, the strength, the physicality, the foot speed to keep up with him. Yes, it can be difficult. And that's the beauty of Dean Wade in this starting lineup, right? The beauty of Dean Wade in the starting lineup is that Donovan Mitchell doesn't have to guard those dudes, right? Darius Garland doesn't have to guard those dudes. Dean Wade can handle those kinds of assignments. And it's not going to be every possession, and it's not going to be every game. But Dean has the ability to hold his own against whoever the best perimeter offensive threat is for that other opponent. Um, and the burden that lifts from Darius and Donovan, and the energy that they're able to expend on the offensive end as a result of not having to expend as much of it on the defensive end. They're just not going to be worn out the same kind of way because Dean is in the starting lineup and he can handle those matchups. It would have been the same if they went with Isaac Okoro, Karis LeVert as well. But that's the beauty of somebody who is such a prolific, as Jared Allen referenced following the game last night. Dean Wade is statistically a top 5 ISO defender in the NBA, according to certain metrics. Jarrett pulled that one out and used that in his post-game press conference last night from the locker room. So he's aware of the impact that Dean Wade can have defensively. And when you're playing against Cade Cunningham, it's probably going to be a lot of ISOs going at you, probably going to be a lot of pick and roll, as we know, with JB Bickerstaff. So you got to be able to handle those matchups.
and Jared loves talking about Dean Wade, right? He loves talking about how much he enjoys playing with him, and I don't think that's the first time he's pulled that top 5 isolation stat out for Dean Wade because he likes raving about his guy. But I also think for Dean Wade, when it comes to the small forward argument that people might make about starting him and who the other options may be, especially with Kenny Atkinson saying that he might want to switch it out depending on matchups, I think it's good even if we don't believe that to be true. Chris, I saw the little face you made. But I believe that these matchups against bigger teams are giving Dean Wade the opportunity not only to start, but to showcase how important and how valuable he can be in these starting lineups to help Kenny Atkinson relieve any tension that he may have within himself to make that decision on a nightly basis.
Well, I don't think he's going to make that decision on a nightly basis. I do not buy it. I mean, I think everything that Kenny has done and everything that he said about the decision to go with Dean Wade led you down a path of he just doesn't think Karras is a great fit next to Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell for extended stretches. And that's what would be required if he was in that starting lineup, especially given how much they're committed to increasing the touches for Evan Mobley, the usage rate for Evan Mobley, and the shot attempts for Evan. There's only one ball. And if you have 4 high usage guys in the start, if you have probably the 5 highest usage guys on your roster in the same starting group, I just think there are too many stylistic complications there. So I think a lot would have to happen for Kenny to reconsider and go with Karis LeVert in that starting group. Or one of the variables would have to change. And then I just don't think he wants to go with Isaac, because I think everybody understands the limitations for this offense when Isaac is out there. He took, I think, 215 total threes last year, Ethan. One was considered by NBA standards contested. The other 214 came with a defender at least 4 feet away at the time of the release. It just restricts what you can do offensively. It just congests the floor. And so much about what this team wants to do is pace and space and 3-point shooting. And when you talk about fit, especially with, your primary 5-man lineup, your starting lineup, and you're focused on that, I just don't think Kenny Atkinson can look at Isaac Okoro and say, yeah, he's a good fit with that group too. So you have guys that you could consider based on matchups, based on situations, based on how Dean is playing. But I just think it would take a lot for Kenny to look at his other options and say, those are better than Dean. They fit better than Dean. They stylistically complement our starting group the same way that Dean does. So as long as Dean plays well and he doesn't, lose confidence, and he doesn't pass up open threes, and he doesn't, suffer an injury that makes him less than 100% and change the dynamic of the kind of player that he can be, then I think he's remaining in this position.
And I know it's a small sample size, but we want to look at stats to end this podcast when it comes to usage rate, when it comes to the conversation that we just had with Dean Wade being a better fit than Karis LeVert, especially in next to the other starters. The usage percentage for players that played over 20 minutes in the season opener against the Toronto Raptors goes Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
then Dean Wade played 20 minutes exactly. His usage rate, 10.2. Karis LeVert's, 21.7. So it's a very big difference. And we understand that the Cavs need somebody to fill in for the role of Max Strus, who doesn't need the ball in his hands to be successful or to make an impact or to draw defenders to him. And as Chris said, the confidence and the ability and the know-how to shoot the ball when it is in the best percentage or the best opportunities for Dean Wade is when we understand that he's going to have the biggest impact on the offensive end. And then the defensive end, he's just going to do his thing and play against some of the best point of attack offensive players and then say, okay, you're not going to have the same success against me, especially if you want to go iso ball. And that's what most of these players like to do. But with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around. because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.